I'm Phil Corbett, and this is The Wind. So that was not edited in. I am recording from my office in the woods at sunrise, and it is very windy. So you may hear some rumble throughout this episode. The wind. This episode is called Coyote.
Well, I can certainly talk about the coyote part. My name is Dan Flores. I'm a writer who lives now in New Mexico, just outside Santa Fe, New Mexico.
The book that introduced me to you was Coyote America. Can you just describe that?
The full title of it is Coyote America, A Natural and Supernatural History. And I gave it that subtitle because the book is the biography of an animal that has played a pretty remarkable role in American history. I mean, it's a indigenous native animal, the whole canid family of animals, in fact, all the dogs and jackals and hyenas and wolves of the world all evolved in North America 5 million years ago and then spread around the world. The coyote is one of them that never left North America. It remained here. I was trying to write a book that would explain to readers something about the story of this animal that's been around a lot longer than any of us has in North America, and is such a crucial part of kind of the warp and weave of North American history that it sort of seems to me that not only do we need to understand it so we're not afraid of them and so we know how to live around them, but so we know more about America and sort of about what being an American really is. And the coyote is a great animal to learn that from. There is a body of stories out there. In fact, it's the oldest literature in North America that are coyote stories. And they're, of course, Indian accounts of this coyote deity figure who, among Western Indians, became kind of a crucial deity or semi-deity, and was also, in the stories that Indians told about him, he was kind of an avatar for humans. He was a stand-in. And the role he plays in the stories is to teach people about who human beings are. In other words, what he really is doing is he's teaching us about human nature. I mean, in the stories, he's often vain and narcissistic and jealous and lustful. I mean, all the bad traits of humanity, he kind of channels so that we can see them. The one that everybody is going to be familiar with, even if they've never thought seriously about them, are the roadrunner Wile E. Coyote cartoons, where Coyote sort of does the same thing. He teaches us about obsession, his pursuit of the roadrunner. He teaches us about being humiliated because, of course, he never catches the roadrunner. He even begins to teach us about how to be savvy consumers of technology because, of course, in the cartoons, the technology always backfires. It never does work. I mean, he puts on jet-propelled roller skates, and rather than catching the roadrunner, of course, he crashes into the side of a cliff. Or he runs into a train in a railroad tunnel. Beep, beep. Beep, beep. This is an animal that always impressed human beings by his survivability and by his intelligence, basically. He gets through the world by being really smart. And that always impressed people, and so we've tended to use his persona as a way to teach us about ourselves.
Can you kind of just lay out a timeline of, the shift in humans and coyotes' relationship in North America?
Yeah, well, it's a roller coaster story, as you indicate. I mean, coyote rides high for a long time, for 10,000 years, in part because for Indian people who don't domesticate and herd animals, they don't really have any fear or any concerns about predators. I mean, Indians are never worried about wolves. They never worry about mountain lions, and they certainly don't ever worry about coyotes. In fact, instead of worrying about them, they tend to observe them very closely and try to learn about themselves and about the world by observing these animals. But when Europeans come over here 500 years ago, they bring out of the old world all these domesticated animals, sheep and goats and cattle, and they've been fighting predators ever since domestication happened, which was 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. They translate this hatred for predators onto not just wolves and mountain lions and bears, but coyotes as well. And so what's kind of interesting about the story is that although Europeans come to North America 500 years ago without any preconceived notions about coyotes, because there are no coyotes in Europe, and so they've never been around them. They don't really, I have a whole chapter about the 19th century where Americans are trying to figure out, what are these animals? Are they jackals? Is it some kind of small wolf? Lewis and Clark called coyotes prairie wolves. They thought they were a version of wolves, and in a way, biologically, they were correct about that. But nobody really knew much about them. They just kind of, and this is almost a classic American thing we do, I believe, is we go ahead and sort of adopt a stance about something, in this case an animal, without ever closely investigating it. And so we decided, Mark Twain wrote this famous book in the 1870s called Roughing It, and he's got about a 4-page comic description of coyotes in that book. And people sort of used Mark Twain's descriptions over the next 30 or 40 years to decide that coyotes were just breathing up good air. And we may as well just go ahead and wipe them out. So we even reach a point by 1931 where the federal government, the United States Congress, passes a law, the Animal Damage Control Act, which is designed to exterminate coyotes from North America. And we pass that law and appropriate $10 million to exterminate them, mostly using poisons, before we have ever done any science to actually try to figure out, so what role do they play in nature? What do they actually eat? Are they really a threat? We don't bother to do the science until a decade after we've already decided we're going to wipe them out. And so it's like the European response is, okay, we've got thousands of years of living with predators in Europe. When we come to North America, anytime you see a predator, no matter what it looks like, what size it is, what role it plays in nature, we're going to try to take it out as soon as we can. And so that sort of constitutes the descent on the roller coaster ride from the tops, the crest of the ride, down to the very bottom and the doldrums, where, we launch in America this campaign of extermination against coyotes. We have a federal lab called the Eradication Methods Lab that's designed to create one new poison after another in order to try to wipe these animals out. So we go for like 75 years, and do everything we can with millions of poison baits out across the American West and try to completely destroy coyotes all over the United States.
So going back to that point about the, poisoning coyotes, hunting coyotes to limit their numbers so they don't eat as much livestock, is that just simply doesn't work? Is there evidence that in fact makes, livestock get eaten quicker and more often?
We know that when coyotes are harassed and persecuted, they're shot, they're poisoned, they're trapped, they're chased, it triggers a set of evolutionary adaptations that they developed not because humans harassed them, because, we Europeans have only been here for a few hundred years. That's not quite long enough for coyotes to actually evolve adaptations to our harassment. What they're calling on are adaptations that they made to being harassed by gray wolves, because gray wolves and coyotes have long been enemies. It's sort of the big dog, little dog thing. And gray wolves have endlessly harassed coyotes to the point that they evolved these mechanisms to survive that kind of harassment. And so when we eliminated gray wolves and sort of substituted our own version of harassment, coyotes just called on those old evolutionary adaptations. And what those are, basically, we've talked about one of them, their ability to have larger litters and to get more pups to adulthood whenever there are fewer coyotes to compete against. But the primary one is what's called a fission-fusion response. And what that means is that coyotes are one of the rare mammals. We humans happen to be one of the other mammals that also evolved this ability, that can function both in groups and as singles or pairs. So coyotes normally are in fusion mode. They will have litters of pups that will become the pack of an alpha pair. So they commonly are in that mode, but they also have the ability to survive as singles and as pairs, not with litters or not with packs with them. And they tend to go into that mode whenever they're harassed, and it stimulates them often to scatter across the countryside and to seek out new territories as singles and as pairs. And so they go into fission mode at that point, meaning they break apart and scatter. And when they do that, it stimulates them to colonize. And so one of the bizarre consequences of our 75-year war of trying to exterminate coyotes in the American West is that we spread them all across the United States. We basically, by removing wolves in the east and then trying to wipe out coyotes in the west, we made it possible for coyotes to cross the Mississippi River and enter into every state in the east and even into big cities. They started going into big cities basically in response to the fact that people don't hunt them or shoot them or try to trap them in cities. And when we adopted dog laws and had dog pounds and dog catchers and dog catchers who would go out and round up stray dogs in cities, that basically opened up the niche for coyotes in cities. So they have moved into, their latest colonization effort is in New York City. But there are probably 5,000 coyotes living in Chicago. Everybody who goes to sleep in the city of Chicago, more than 8 million people, every time they lay their head on the pillow and turn out the lights and go to sleep at night, there's a coyote within a half mile of them. And that's sort of a new way to think about American urban living. Some people have said, my God, that's the end of civilization, that a predator is now living in the midst of our cities. But coyotes have been doing this for a long time. They've been living around humans because they eat mice and rats, and our houses generate a lot of rodents. And so they've been doing this forever, and now they've moved into our biggest metropolises.
And so the descriptions, like you mentioned, the Mark Twain description sort of, that marks a pivot in people's opinions of coyotes. Are there a lot of other descriptions that, sort of, don't know, either defy Mark Twain's original thoughts or that just sort of crystallize it?
Yeah, I try to track down the sort of the literary reaction to coyotes after Mark Twain's passage in Roughing It.
The coyote is a long, slim, sick, and sorry-looking skeleton with a gray wolf skin stretched over it. A tolerably bushy tail that forever sags down with a despairing expression of forsakenness and misery. A furtive and evil eye and a long, sharp face with slightly lifted lip and exposed teeth. He has a general slinking expression all over. The coyote is a living, breathing allegory of want. He is always hungry, he is always poor, out of luck, and friendless.
I mean, what I more or less profile is a period of about 30 or 40 years after Mark Twain writes this passage, where writers sort of attempted to outdo one another in castigating coyotes. I mean, one of the stories I tell is about a writer doing a story for Scientific American, actually, in 1920. I mean, this is right after World War I, right after the Russian Revolution. And this guy basically writes a story for Scientific American where he encourages Americans to shoot coyotes on sight, and then goes on to say, I realize that they're not worth the cost of the ammunition that it takes to kill them, but you should go ahead and kill them for patriotic reasons, because after all, the coyote is the original Bolshevik. In other words, coyotes are communists.
And so the descriptions of the coyotes are frequently accompanied by a description of their howl and the way they sound.
Oh, yeah.
And you write about, I think it's in the very beginning of the chapter, A War on Wild Things, how most people's interaction with coyotes is hearing them. You don't see them as often as you hear them. How is that that description of the howl changed over time? Did that change pretty dramatically with the change of attitude?
As you recall from the book, I mean, in that same chapter, I go on to talk about how people described coyote howls, how Americans did in the 19th century. They used terms like hideous and blood-curdling and, makes you wake up in bed at night in a cold sweat. And
them coyotes give me the creeps.
In fact, one of the most commonly used adjectives for a coyote howl by people from European backgrounds was alien. In North America, the coyote's howl was the last thing from being alien. The Europeans were the aliens, in fact, and the coyote was, in fact, the native animal that had been howling that howl for 5 million years in North America. Coyotes have a remarkable ability as ventriloquists. And so what people will often hear and decide, wow, that's a pack of 10 or 12 coyotes just going crazy. And what they will often say, it's part of the urban legend thing, they must have made a really big kill, because the more of them that are howling and the louder it is, the bigger the kill they made. Well, what they're actually usually hearing are about 2 coyotes, possibly 3, that have the ability to sort of throw their voices and work in harmony as a suite of ventriloquists. So it sounds like 10 animals instead of the 2 that are actually sitting on the ridge and howling. But, I mean, people hear that. I mean, I'd still have folks say that to me over coffee or over beers. Man, I heard 15 coyotes last night. They must have brought down a mule deer or something. And I have to say, well, probably what you heard was 3. And no, those howls are not in exultation at having made a kill. This is how they communicate with one another. And I mean, they're sort of endlessly, the packs are endlessly howling in order to establish and confirm their territories. And they're also kind of doing a census of how many coyotes are in a local landscape. And so it's one of the ways that they adjust their numbers, actually.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask about next, is that they'll take a census account of how many coyotes are in the area, and then the female coyotes will then produce more pups if the numbers are low, correct?
Yeah. The absence of answering coyote howls in an area seems to trigger some sort of chemical response in the females. And I mean, the way this actually works is that we do think that it probably does stimulate them to have larger litters. But one of the things that having the coyote population be suppressed in an area does is that it releases more food resources for the coyotes that are there. And one of the things biologists have discovered about this is that if the coyote population has been suppressed because people are trying to poison them out or shoot them from helicopters or something, what that often will mean is that it's possible for the female coyotes to raise more of their pups to adulthood. It sort of functions in several different ways. They do tend to have bigger litters, but they can also raise their pups more effectively.
And so what is the use of, the ventriloquism? Are they trying to pad their numbers for, territorial reasons, or is it just the way humans hear it? Like, is that how they're communicating with each other?
I don't think the coyotes are fooled by the ventriloquism. I think other coyotes quickly can ascertain from the howls how many animals are involved. But humans tend to hear it that way, and in part we hear it that way because they howl in a lot of different registers. I mean, and rather than doing a wolf howl, which of course is a long, drawn-out howl, a single howl, coyotes tend to yip and bark a lot in the middle of a howl. So sometimes what you will be hearing is there will be the high-pitched keening, the actual howl itself, but it'll be surrounded by yips and barks and all sorts of staccato sounds that make it sound like, okay, there's one coyote that's doing the high-pitched howl, and there are two or three of them that are barking and yipping. Well, often that's one animal. It's doing all those sounds at one time.
Exactly. And that seems to be that's what coyotes are doing for the most part when they're calling. They're shouting, long distances to communicate with each other.
They are indeed. They're shouting out across the valley, and as I say in Coyote America, I mean, they've been doing this here for 5 million years. And so if we think of America in the proper sense as not a new place, but a very old place that stretches back across millions of years of time, I mean, the Coyote Howl is the original American national anthem.
The following is a real press release from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, filed on January 3rd, 1921. I did edit it a little bit for clarity and brevity, but otherwise it is word for word. The Custer Wolf is dead. He was the master criminal of the animal world. For 9 years, this wolf had lived as an outlaw, the cruelest, the most sagacious, the most successful animal outlaw that the range country had ever known. His cruelty was surpassed only by his cunning. He killed with the refinement of animal ferocity, here tonight, tomorrow night, devastating a range 100 miles away. He loped through every kind of danger and spurned them all, sniffing out the subtlest poison and passing it by, as clear to him as a mirror in the sunshine. Old hunters, unerring shots drew the bead on him and saw him glide away, unharmed. The price on his head, $500. Bounty hunters sought him for profit. Sportsmen put forth every device to slay him for reputation's sake, and still the old wolf went unscathed about his work of destruction. Credulous people said he was a charmed thing. Others attributed his immunity to a wisdom greater than beast ever before possessed. Still, others said he escaped by plain luck. The mysterious thing that adheres to some animals, as to some men. In whatever way they explained his uncanny elusiveness, everybody feared him. Perhaps not consciously, very rarely openly, but there was no man throughout the region who did not feel a shiver run down between his shoulder blades when, alone or in the dark, he thought of this gray devil of the desert. All kinds of stories got abroad. This thing, they said, was not a wolf, or not merely a wolf. They believed that nature had perpetuated a monstrosity, half wolf, half mountain lion, possessing the craftiness of both and the cruelty of hell. In public opinion, he had all the qualities of the werewolf of old world legends. So no wonder the telephones hummed when the word went out that a hunter sent by the United States Department of Agriculture to protect the livestock industry had killed this criminal wolf. That word ended a 9 years reign of dread, during which the stockmen around Custer, South Dakota, had paid tribute to this wolf to the extent of $25,000 worth of livestock. And mere money loss was not the whole of the horrible toll he took. When he killed for food, he took only the choicest animals. But sometimes he killed in atrocious ways for the mere sake of killing. Often, he wounded cattle, breaking legs, biting off tails, mutilating them in unspeakable ways. 4 years ago, his mate was killed. He never took another, and many supposed that he devoted himself to revenge for her death. Later on, he attached to himself 2 coyotes, not as equals but as servants. He never permitted them to come near him, and they could feed from his kills only after he had finished. They traveled far on his flanks, giving him warning of ambush or approaching danger and adding to the atmosphere of mystery that seemed to surround him. And it did. In 1920, the federal government sent to South Dakota H.P. Williams, one of its best hunters, with instructions to stay after this wolf until he was taken. And so, Williams went. When he first stepped into the country where the wolf ranged, he tried to find fresh tracks, but without success. Instead of following the advice of stockmen who had a guess of his quarters, Williams went into the hills. On April 1st, he had his first glimpse of the wolf, but was unable to get a shot at him. The coyotes were acting as bodyguards, traveling from 1 to 200 yards on the flanks of their master. They would warn him of danger by taking flight. Williams shot at both of them, hoping that he would gain a clear field. But in this way, he was greatly mistaken. Leaving the coyotes behind, the wolf played hide-and-seek with the hunter. After making a kill, he would go on some distance, backtrack for a few rods to a point where he could keep under cover and watch the hunter on his trail. At other times, the wolf took to fallen timber, so he could not be tracked. And after a few near escapes from traps, the Custer Wolf left the country for a while. No sign could be found of him until the night of August 1st, when he made his presence known by killing several head of cattle. Williams found some of these cattle, took the trail of the wolf, and followed him all the way to the mouth of the canyon. Knowing that the wolf would be taking a nap after his big feed, Williams tied his horse and started into the canyon. But 2 horsemen rode up behind him at breakneck speed, alerting the wolf to their presence, and he escaped. Williams left traps all over the country, catching little bits of Custer Wolf's fur, but never his whole self. Until October 11th. Here is his account of it. He stepped into the trap in the morning, and it got a good grip on him. He ran with it for about 150 yards until the hook caught on a tree. But that did not seem to stop him at all. He broke the swivel of the trap and ran with it on his front foot. I trailed him for 3 miles and got a shot at him, and I got him. He has been so lucky that I expected the gun would fail to shoot, but it worked out okay. He is smaller than the average male wolf, 98 pounds, 6 feet from tip to tip. His teeth would be good for 15 years longer. He broke some of them off on the trap, but aside from that, they were in good condition. He is an old wolf with a fur that is almost white. In that simple fashion does the man who outwitted the cleverest of animal criminals tell his story. End of press release. Now, the press release sent out by the coyotes who knew Custer Wolf differed quite a bit. First of all, it was not in English, the language of hunters, so I will concede that some of it may be mistranslated, but I have done my best. For immediate release, the 4th day of Yellow Leafs, year 4,982,001. Custer Wolf has been killed. It is with padded and mixed sorrow that we report the death of a great canine warrior. He was one of the few left who could truly strike fear in the invading forces, though, as we know, it did not start out that way. When the humans brought new animals to this land, we saw it as an offering of peace. Though they had begun to establish many dens along our rivers and in the hunting grounds, disrupting our culinary traditions, they too brought with them incredible meats. Though us coyotes were content with the scores of mice and rats that seemed to flow from these new human habitations, they too brought weird-shaped buffaloes, hornless sheep, and of course the tender white meat of caged birds. Our sworn enemy, the wolf, was partial to these larger offerings, howling with delight each night the full moon illuminated entire fields of slow, delicious animals. The old-timer wolves, always suspicious of gifts, avoided these scenes, but as the next generation came to run the land, they had no moral qualms with taking advantage of the offerings. They were, after all, left out at night as gifts. No real misgivings, until they began to die in wholly new ways. Killed from the outside by invisible pops, killed from within after eating a meal in an open field, and killed by the jaws of another new animal, bloodless, shiny, without fear or instinct, except for the instinct to clamp with the slightest touch and never let go. As this younger generation of wolves succumbed to their desires, the suspicions of the old-timers began to resurface. They withdrew into the familiar woods, but in retreat found that their old ways of hunting were no longer enough to sustain. These were not the same woods. The deer, the beaver, the rabbits that they had long picked off at will had reduced numbers as well. Even the woods themselves began to shrink and disappear, the edges inching toward each other every year. Though in retrospect a sign of things to come, this was a good time for us coyotes. No longer harassed by the wolf, we were free to roam the prairies and the deserts, shouting and yipping to our heart's content, until the invisible death began to fall upon us too. In retreat, some of us created alliances that just one generation previous we could never have imagined. And so that is how us coyotes found ourselves in league with Custer Wolf. An animosity still present, but laced with the knowledge of a common threat. The knowledge that when one of us died off, so would the other. And so would the rabbit, and so would the birds and the woods and the buffalo. Thinking like a mountain, we joined flanks and roamed the land, striking not for revenge or war as our intention is often ascribed, but for food. Well, sometimes for fun. But mostly for our ancestors and for the way things were and for the way that things could have been. In fact, we knew nothing of revenge until it was taught to us by man. And specifically the Custer man, an upright being whose only pleasure seemed to come from the killing of creatures. We watched as he pursued Custer Wolf for months, killing and eating every type of animal you can imagine, carrying bags of animal parts to satiate his undying hunger and hatred for all things not upright. We watched as he left his metal-jawed servants laying around in fields, and we felt as he broke our skin with invisible pops. And finally, we watched as the metal jaws caught the foot of Custer Wolf and refused to let go. And we watched as the man knelt over the wolf and performed a pornographic ritual. And we watched as the man carried him back to town crying with laughter, and we watched as he was celebrated for the killing of an animal that even he wouldn't eat. End of press release. Well, that brings us to the main attraction, the Wind's first ever coyote calling contest. While reporting this story, I found out that there is a thing called a coyote calling contest, but it has nothing to do with calling coyotes and instead is about killing them. So I figured, we could do better than that. I posted a call for submissions on Instagram and Twitter for your best howls and yips, and you sent in a lot of good ones. So here are the 6 finalists. Hey, you have reached the Wind, and specifically, you have called about the Coyote Calling Contest. To enter this competition, state your name or a fake name after the beep, and let rip your best coyote impersonation. The finalists will be played on air, and the winner will get something nice. Good luck. All right, first we have Skip Donahue.
Hey, Phil, this is Skip Donahue, and this is my entrance for the Coyote Call competition. Yip, 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 yip.
Nice. Some great musicality, in key, some good jumps in register. Pro. Next we have Rachel.
This is Rachel.
Oof, that is a good one. Jumping register, a solitary coyote in the night, the phone line breaking to signify loneliness. Excellent work. Next we have Adrian.
Adrian.
I am Coyote! Yip, 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 yip.
Interesting form translating to English. Now we have our first canine entry from Eugen.
This is Eugen.
Gotta hand it to that dog, she's got the moves, but does she have the gumption? Next, speaking of gumption.
Hi, this is Hella Gentio from Silver Lake, Los Angeles, and we're going to do this Coyote Call business. Let's go.
Whew! An entire pack of coyotes in fusion mode, yipping up a storm. Let's just hope they are social distancing. And that brings us to our last finalist, Frank.
Hey, this is Frank. Some of you might know me as Grandpa, but here's my howl. Howl! 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 Thank you.
Grandpa Frank with some great resonance. All right, well, this has been a hard decision, and I truly believe that anybody who called my voicemail to howl like a coyote is a winner, cosmically speaking. But for the purposes of this contest, I have narrowed it down. First, an honorable mention goes to the pack from Silver Lake, Los Angeles, with an incredible show of force. However, I could not understand the name given in the beginning, so disqualified from the finals. I am sorry. So it comes down to two. First, Rachel. And Frank.
Howl! 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 Howl!
And the winner of the Wind Inaugural Coyote Calling Contest is... Rachel. Thank you for playing. You have won the only prize fit for a coyote, a chicken. Due to COVID-19 restrictions, I will simply Venmo you enough money to buy a rotisserie chicken at the supermarket of your choice. I'll text you shortly. The Wind is produced by me, Phil Corbett. Thanks this week to Dan Flores, whose book Coyote America originally inspired this episode, to Eleanor Tulloch, who sent the Custer Wolf press release. Thanks to Lauren Baker and to Sydney Martinez. The music in this episode was 1-4-M and Gem.Wave by Eclept Insan. Then Chuya Chaki by Peruvian producer Deltatron, and finally this song from the public domain. Subscribe, leave a review, follow on social media, or send an episode to a friend. And for links to everything cited in the show, visit thewind.org. Thank you for being here, and keep listening.
Coyote, coyote, what have they done? My little brother, where do you run? They've poisoned the mazes, they've poisoned the plain. My little brother, the coyote, won't come back again. Coyote, coyote, what have they done? Where will you run? Kind of a wail, not a song. You get out of those flat plains.